Good evening. My name is Chelsea Rosebrook. I'm a hike leader and volunteer for the Portland chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon. Um, NPSO promotes the enjoyment, study, and protection of Oregon's native plants, and I'd especially like to welcome any new members tonight who are joining us. As part of our mission, we present a speaker each month on timely topics of interest to our members. Our speaker tonight is Dina Pavlis, presenting Plant Life in the Oregon Dunes. First, let's review some Zoom etiquette. Your audio and video should be turned off during the program. After the presentation, you'll be able to unmute and turn your cameras on. If you have any questions during the program, click on the chat button and you can ask your question in there. Dina will address those questions after the presentation. You'll also notice there's a closed caption feature that you can turn on as well at the bottom of the screen. We have two general announcements before we get going. The first includes the 21st annual No Ivy Day, and that's going to be on October 26th from 9 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. No Ivy Day is a yearly stewardship event that the Portland Parks and Rec partnerships or partners with organizations across the Portland metro area. This hosts a variety of removal events through neighborhoods like Milwaukee, Beaverton, and Lake Oswego. NPSO also closes out the day with celebrations to thank our volunteers at Mount Tabor and Forest Park. So you can find those events there at the end of events. You can find more information on that as well at portland.gov.com. And then the second announcement is an announcement about the benefits for the Native Plant Society at the Sauvie Island Native Nursery. This takes place November 9th and 10th. That's Saturday and Sunday. And this is an opportunity to get some native plants if you need them for your yard and also support the NPSO budget. So the Portland chapter, one of our Portland chapter members, Jane Hartland, is the owner of Sauvie Island's Natives Nursery, and will be contributing 10% on sale during this event to NPSO when it's mentioned at checkout. So this is a great way to raise money for NPSO and support it, and also get some native plants for this fall. The funds for that will also go to the 2025 annual meeting, which is hosted by our Portland chapter this year. Directions to the farm and nursery and some more information on the plants is also online on her website. That's sauvienatives.com. And again, that event is Saturday and Sunday, November 9th and 10th. And there is appointments to be made online for talking to Jane and also getting the plants that you'd like. So now it's time to introduce our speaker, Dina Pavlis. So Dina Pavlis served as a volunteer interpretive ranger for the U.S. Forest Service on the Oregon Dunes for over 20 years. She's an author of the book Secrets of the Oregon Dunes and producer of the syndicated radio program Beyond Your Front Door Northwest. As an avid hiker and nature photographer, Dina's been featured on Oregon Public Broadcasting's Think Out Loud and NPR's All Things Considered. She serves on the steering committee of Oregon Dunes and Restoration Collaborative. And in tonight's presentation, Dina will give us an overview of the various native plant habitats found in Oregon, in the Oregon Dunes. She also will discuss current threats facing both native plants and the open sand habitat. Let's welcome Dina.
Great. Thank you so much, Chelsea. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen and jump right in here. So give me 1 second. All right. And I need to view play slideshow. All right. Can everybody see that okay? Oh, I guess I can't see the chat box, Chelsea. So if there's a problem, just let me know.
You're all good.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, I need to shrink this just a little bit here. And all right, here we go. All right. So welcome and thank you very much for having me today. My goal today is to just kind of give you a a broad overview of the different plant habitats of the Oregon dunes. I had a little heart attack when Chelsea said plant habitats of Oregon, but this is just specific to the dunes. And one of the exciting things about the Oregon dunes, at least that I like, is when you take a hike from the east end of the dunes, which is where the forest is, out to the beach, you actually get to walk through several different habitats. And so I'm going to be talking about those different habitats today, and then I'll give you an overview of some of the interesting plants that you'll see there. Definitely, I can't show you everything or we would be here for days and days on end. But I also want to talk about our open sand habitat that is disappearing. And so the second half of this presentation, I'll talk about why the dunes are disappearing and what efforts are in place to try and save them. I'm not able to see the chat box. So if you have questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat box. And then Chelsea's going to have those questions at the end for us. All right, so I'm going to just jump in. Here we go. All right, and there we go. All right, so again, we'll be doing an overview of the plant habitats of the Oregon dunes. We'll talk about how and why native plant habitats have changed dramatically during the 20th century. And then we'll also talk about current efforts to try and save and restore the dunes, which is, in some ways, we can't really restore everything. That will never happen. And so I'll talk about that. And then I'm going to just share at the end some of my favorite resources for looking at plants here in the Oregon dunes. So let's talk first a little bit. This is an aerial photo from 1997 of the Oregon Dunes day use area. That area is within the Oregon Dunes National Recreation Area. And the National Recreation Area runs from Coos Bay to Florence. And the National Recreation Area ends at the south side of the Siuslaw River, which is the main river in Florence. But these dunes actually extend up past Florence to the north of Florence, but that area is not in the National Recreation Area. So I'm going to just give a quick overview of some of the different habitats here. So the dunes start at the beach. So the beach is included and considered part of the Oregon dunes. And then behind the beach, we have the foredune. And I'll be showing you examples of all these with photos as we go through the presentation. But the foredunes, if any of you have been to the coast and walked out to the beach across the dunes, you've had to go up and over a huge hill of sand, but it's covered in grass. That's the foredune. And then just to the east of the foredune is the deflation plain. And the deflation plain is where sand has continued to blow inland and we've hit the water table and no new sand has come into that area. And so we have wetlands there, and we also have plant succession occurring. So it starts with wetlands, and then because we just don't have any moving sand and we have a lot of moisture, it's just a great habitat for plants. So then we start to get shrubs in there, some willows, and plants like that. And then we begin to get trees. And so that's the area that you're looking at here. And so that has its own plant habitat. And then we'll also be talking about the open sand habitat, which I once read an article, a reporter came to the dunes and she said, the Oregon dunes, they're devoid of life. And I thought, oh my gosh, you must have not walked out there because there's so many beautiful native plants in the open sand habitat. And of course, many animals that call the dunes home as well. And then lastly, I will talk about what's called the transitional forest and tree islands. The yellow arrow is pointing to a tree island, and those habitats are really similar. Definitely some of the plants that I'll be talking about today may occur in more than one habitat. So, for example, some plants that appear in the transitional forest might also appear in the deflation plain. And some of the plants that are in the open sand habitat can be found sometimes on the foredunes. So they do sometimes cross over. All right, so here we're looking at a picture of the Oregon dunes from 1941 on the left, and I think it's 2020 on the right. My screen is blocked by some Zoom thing there, so I can't see the date. And the red arrow that you see on the screen is pointing to a tree island. And I'm doing that so that you can see that this is the same location and that is the same tree island. But I wanted you to be able to see how much this dune habitat has changed and how much of the open sand habitat we've lost. And I'll again be focusing more on that as we go through the presentation, and also why we've lost it more towards the end of the presentation. But this kind of shows you how things have changed over the last 100 years, a little bit over that, maybe 140 years or so. And down here in this picture, what I'm showing you is the open sand habitat. So this is the area I'm going to speak about first, and some of the natives that live there. The first thing I want to talk about is what it looks like. So in case anyone attending this has not been to the Oregon Dunes yet, the open sand habitat looks just like this. Open sand may or may not be this beautiful, depends on the day that you're there. This was after a storm and we'd had some wind and some water. And so it created quite a beautiful pattern out there. And the plants that live in the open sand habitat have quite a few adaptations to help them survive. And two of the really important ones are large tap roots. And so on the left, you can see the beech knotweed, and you can see that it has this large tap root. And a lot of times these tap roots get exposed like this one during the summer. So we have a lot of wind here on the coast in the summer and the sand is dry, and that will blow the sand inland and actually uncover many of these large tap roots. And the plants still continue to thrive. As you can see, this beech knotweed is still alive and doing fine. And so those tap roots will help hold moisture in. And then on the right, where we have the beech carrot, you can see a lot, hopefully you can see that there's a lot of little hairs there. And so those little hairs also help to hold in moisture as well as protect those plants from blowing sand. So those are two of the main adaptations that you'll see on many of the plants in the open sand habitat. So some of my favorite plants that I see or that I get the most questions about are the beech carrot, which is on the left. And I'm just going to go back a screen really quickly. The beech carrot that you're seeing here is in its flowering stage. So you can see that it has these little clusters of white flowers that are forming. And then that happens usually in early spring, early to late spring. It depends on how much water we have, how much rain we have. And then it goes to this fruiting stage, which is really incredible. And these fruits can vary in color anywhere from white to light green, all the way to a dark, deep, dark red. So it really varies. And I get a lot of questions about these, and I don't think you can make it out in this photo, but the leaves at the top, if you can kind of see underneath them, they have all of those little hairs there and everything. Also, just it's another plant with a big tap root and lots of hairs. And then over on the right, I have the pink sand verbena and the yellow sand verbena. And the pink sand verbena, I tend to see more on the foredunes, that open sand that's closer to the ocean. And the yellow sand verbena, when I encounter it, is usually more inland. And again, they're also covered with hairs. The interesting thing about these plants, to me at least, that's interesting, is the yellow sand verbena has the most beautiful scent. And if you ever come across it and you can get down and take a good sniff, it's great. And the pink sand verbena is really beautiful, but doesn't have as good of a scent, in my opinion, I think. All of these plants that you're seeing here, especially the sand verbenas, are threatened. They're losing habitat now as that deflation plain that you saw in that earlier photo is expanding inland and covering this open sand habitat. Also on the open sand habitat, we have seashore lupin, and I'll be tapping something in a moment, but that shows you these names, but I also want to give you a chance to actually see the pictures clearly. So the seashore lupin, we have some other lupins that are out on the dunes, one that's native and one that's invasive or non-native, but This one is easily recognized because it doesn't get those really tall lupin flowers, and sometimes they're white. Usually what I see is purple or a purple and white mixture. And then down below, we also have a coastal strawberry. And one of the things that I really like about the strawberries is how good they are. So if you want to visit here and try to get strawberries, come usually around the end of June or early July. Again, depends on how much rain we've had as to when they actually fruit. This year they fruited late. I was collecting them in August. And I think it's because we had such a wet spring, but they are super good. They're about the size of your pinky nail. So it would take a lot to try to gather them to make a pie or something, but just to eat them is so fantastic. You will get sand in your mouth, but you won't care because they're so good. And then we have, this is the beech knotweed that you saw in the other photo with the taproot, but here it is flowering. So I just wanted to kind of show you what that looks like when it flowers. It's really beautiful. And then over on the right, we have one of our many fungi or mushrooms that I'll be talking about some of those today as well, called the dune stinkhorn. And that's really a fun one to see as well. And then I just wanted to also talk about on the open sand habitat, we also have some native grasses. And so on the right, you can see two of our native grasses, the seashore bluegrass and the red fescue. And the seashore bluegrass is a trailing bluegrass, so it puts out trailers, and it actually needs moving sand to thrive. It thrives in a moving sand habitat, and you'll see in some later photos how our sand does move and shift. Both of these grasses are disappearing. They're being outcompeted by our non-native, on the left in the rear of the photo, European beach grass, which is a non-native invasive grass that was planted here, and we'll talk about why. And then in the front, you can see our Native American dune grass. And I love this photo because if you really look at this photo up close, you can see how the dune grass has that wide blade and it kind of bends over and it's not really dense. And so historically, that is what was growing out on the foredunes around the beach, and it would allow the sand to pass over it because it bends over in the wind. And so the sand's able to pass over it and pass through it. It has a short root system, just several inches. And so it could be uprooted in storms and allow sand to continue to move. The grass behind it, the Ammophila arenaria, which recently was reclassified as a Calamagrostis arenaria, but I will often still say Ammophila, so bear with me. I'm in the habit of that after 20 something years. But that is a really stiff, dense grass, and it traps that moving sand. And one of the ways that that grass grows is as it gets buried, it sprouts new roots or rhizomes and then grows taller. And I have some pictures, you'll get to see how that works in a future slide. But that is what is creating those very tall foredunes out at the beach. And again, if you've been here, you've had to walk up and over 25, 30-foot dune there, and that is blocking the incoming sand and preventing it from moving inland. And I'm going to talk about it more in the next slide. Chelsea, I'm just going to let you know, since I can't see the chat, if a question comes up that you think I should answer right now, just put your screen on, turn on your camera, and I'll see you and I'll know to stop so that you can give me the question. All right. So on this next screen, I want to talk a little bit about the beach grass and some of the impact that it's had here on the dunes. And so in the upper right photo is a picture of the foredunes. This was taken at Heceta Beach, and you can see how that sand is spreading. I mean, the grass is spreading there and covering that area. And I'm going to talk and have more slides coming up about how it grows. But then down below, I'm standing on a foredune, but I'm now looking east instead of west towards the ocean. This is out at John Dellenbach Trail. And you can see how this grass has trapped all of that sand at the beach. And so no new sand has come into the area, and that's allowed that deflation plain to form. So the wetlands have formed, and then from there we get the shrubs, things like the spirea and the willows and huckleberry and those types of shrubs that come in. And then it eventually, we have that plant succession happening where then it becomes a forest. And you can see that really clearly in that photo. Over on the left, we have hummocks, and hummocks are somewhat of a new feature on the dunes, a new topographical feature. We used to have hummocks that would form with native plants. So in the winter, our native plants would grow and they would trap the sand and create these little hummocks or tiny hills of sand. And then those plants would die off in the winter and those hummocks would move and blow around. But now as this beach grass spreads, it's trapping that sand and creating these permanent hummocks or hills. And I'm going to come back to that picture in a minute, but I want to show you how when the sand is buried, as you can see in this photo here, this was after a storm, so that was an extreme bury. We had 80, 90 mile an hour gusts at the beach, and that sand covered that beach grass. But what happens is that beach grass literally will just sprout new roots or rhizomes where it's buried and grow taller. And then it gets buried again, sprouts new roots and rhizomes and grows taller. And what we have on the left is this effect. It's like a layer cake of sand roots, sand roots, sand roots. And in fact, this stabilized piece of sand here is stabilized enough that it's allowing a willow now to grow on top of it. So that is a great way to see kind of how this sand roots looks like. If you just took a slice right out of a foredune, that's what that would look like. This is actually not a foredune, but it would be exactly the same, but it's in inland, which is why that willow is growing there on top of it. And so the sand creates these hummocks that look just like this one with the willow that gets, the wind comes in and it scarps out. We have scarping happening here and also along the beach, but those roots are holding that cliff in place. And on the right, I'm holding some beach grass in an area where the beach grass was sprayed and the beach grass died, and it's allowing the sand to start moving around again. But these roots are here, and you can see I'm holding up these roots to give you an idea of how long they are. They are about 25 feet long. That's how long they can grow. And they are about as fine as your hair. So if you ever come to the dunes, I challenge you to pull out some of this European beach grass. We don't want it here, so feel free to pull it out. But pull it out and see how many roots you get with it, because most likely you're just going to get an inch or so. And so this process of layer caking that you see, what's happening on the left here is, if you look at these hummocks, you can see the one in the rear is the tallest. Then we have the next tallest in front of that, then the next tallest, and then in the front, it's pretty flat where the grass is growing. And you can tell how long the grass has been growing in a certain location by how tall the hummock is. Because what's happened again is that grass has been buried and grown taller, gets buried again, grows taller. So the oldest hummock in this photo is the one in the rear. That's been there the longest. And then each one has been there for not as long. And then what's happening is this grass is spreading, it's growing across the dunes. And what is closest to us is the newest area where the grass is growing and has spread. And eventually hummocks will form here as well. So here's an overall view just to kind of show you what's happening on the dunes. And so these red arrows are pointing to those foredunes that are covered with grass. And again, that is blocking incoming sand. The sand is not able to blow inland. And so in order to have a healthy dune system in Oregon on the coast, we need three things. We need a flat coastline, because that enables the sand to move inland. So if you think about, if you've come to the coast, and for example, if you go north of Florence to Heceta, a light station, and we have a rocky headland there, we don't have dunes because those rocky headlands are blocking that sand. But anywhere on the Oregon coast where it's flat, we have dunes, and there's actually 4 locations where we have dunes. They make up about 45% of our coastline. And so that sand now is blocked. We've lost that flat coastline because of these tall foredunes. And so we've lost that. The other 2 things you need are a lot of sand, which we have. Most of our sand here has come from the Umpqua River, from the Cascade Mountains. And so those rocks are ground up in the river as they are washed down from the mountains. And then that sand is deposited. out of the Umpqua River, which is right down near Reedsport, which is right in the center of the Oregon Dunes National Recreation Area. And then that sand is washed north and south with the tides, washed up on the beach, and then the wind carries it back in. We have a lot of wind here, especially in the summer when the sand is dry. It's windy pretty much every day. So when it's hot in the valley in the summer, it creates a convection and carries that wind inland, brings that wind inland, and that carries that sand in. And then we need the wind. That's the third thing. So flat coastline, a vehicle to move it, which is the wind, and a lot of sand. And so we've lost one of those conditions here. And then you can see now we've had plant succession occurring and then a forest beginning to grow. So that's just kind of gives you an overview. And when I first moved to Oregon and started working on the Oregon Dunes as a volunteer on day one that I moved here, because I moved here for the dunes, I was told they would be, most of our open sand would be gone in about 100 years. And now I'm telling people about 75 years. I've been here almost 25 years. And it's true that in areas where there's ATVs, we have more open sand, but we also have no native plants or anything that can really grow where, other than we do get beach grass in those areas, but not much can grow there as well. So it's not, turning ATVs loose everywhere is not a solution to fix this, because it doesn't help the open sand plant habitat. All right, so let's talk about the deflation plain. So I said, even though this is not a natural habitat or feature of the dunes, that it's not something we want to see here, it is exciting to be here and get to walk across all of these different habitats. And there are some beautiful plants in the deflation plain. So here's, again, just a reminder of what that deflation plain looks like. Again, I'm standing on a foredune looking east. And this is just a great picture showing you some of the plant succession that occurs there. So again, underneath the Oregon Dunes are aquifers. And in the winter, these aquifers flood. So we get a lot of rain here and the aquifers rise up and create wetlands on the dunes. And so in these wetlands, now that they're being stabilized by this European beach grass, the other plants are allowed to grow. So we're starting to see the spirea, we're starting to see in this picture, I can see the coastal willows growing, and we're also starting to we might start seeing huckleberries, and then eventually the trees, what you're seeing here. So here are some of the plants that I like that I see in that area. Well, I like all of these except the one in the lower right corner, which I'll talk about. So we have in the upper left, I've got the coast willow, which is so beautiful in the spring when it's just starting to flower. It's so exciting to see it. And then of course the shore pines that we have growing there. And then we also have a lot of sedges and rushes. And so two of the common ones that you'll see out there is the slough sedge here, and then also the salt rush. And I just think that salt rush is so beautiful. I love to go out and look at it when it's blooming in the spring. It's so gorgeous. And then of course, we also in the deflation plain have a lot of broom. And the main two brooms that we have here are Portuguese broom and Scotch broom. And I'm going to back up one so you can see that picture. In the front is the Scotch broom, and the Scotch broom pods are kind of like well, they're green to dark brown depending on their stage, but they just get a little bit of fuzz around the edges. And the Portuguese broom, which you can see behind that, gets those big fuzzy pods. There are other ways to tell them apart as well, how many ridges are on the stems and things like that. But when they go to seed, that's the easiest way to tell them apart. Their color's also slightly different when you see them side by side. So the reason we have so much broom here is when European settlers arrived, they wanted to stabilize the dunes. And I'm going to tell that story in the second half of this presentation. But the way that they did it was they brought in European beach grass first as a way to stabilize and hold sand in place. And then the plan was 2 years later to come in with Scotch broom and plant Scotch broom as a nitrogen fixer to help trees and shrubs begin to grow. So the plan worked. I mean, they were smart. They knew what they were doing. It's unfortunate because now we realize what a catastrophe this is. But that is why when you go places like the Oregon Dunes Day Use Area, South Jetty, which is in Florence, you'll see so much broom. It's incredible. You just walk through a forest of broom, unfortunately. All right, so other plants that you'll see out in the wetlands, and I just want to mention that there are wetlands in the open sand habitat as well. As those aquifers rise up through the sand, they do create wetlands that will form with, that don't always go through plant succession, but eventually I'm noticing over the past 25 years that many of the wetland areas that were just rushes and sedges are now starting to show signs of willows and other plants. They're starting to see that plant succession and a lot of pines coming up. And I think it's really because that grass is holding that sand in place around those areas now. So we're just not having as much sand movement. So some other ones that you'll find, the bog blueberries or the bilberries over on the left. This is a good time of year to go out and pick those. If you're out foraging for mushrooms, you can pick a ton of these, and that's what I've been doing like crazy. And they're pretty good. They're not, maybe not as good as a blueberry, but for some reason, when you're out on a hike, they taste better when you find something in the wild. And we have monkey flowers, which I really like. And I tend to see the monkey flowers out on the open sand habitat where there's been a lot of water. And it's really beautiful because you'll be walking along at the end of the summer and all of a sudden you'll come to a place where it's just like a carpet of yellow, these beautiful monkey flowers, and then lots of little tiny wildflowers also. So if you have a chance to come here, and a lot of these I see later in the summer, I do see some of these wildflowers blooming in the spring, but I tend to see many of these photos that you're looking at. In fact, the owl clover, the salt marsh owl clover that you're seeing, you can see behind me that it's dry. I'm in a wetland, but it's dry. So a lot of times I see these near the end of the summer flowering, and that's a really good time to explore those wetlands, especially in the open sand habitat, or sometimes you can find good dry wetlands at the east end of the deflation plain as well. All right, so I want to move on and talk about the transitional forest and also tree islands. So let's talk a little bit about the transitional forest. And you can see here some dead trees on the left and some live trees on the right. And what's happening is this is the area where as sand is blowing inland from the coast, it's backing up to the forest at the east edge. And this, I'm actually looking east here. So the sand is coming from the southwest. So it's moving, I'm sorry, it's coming from the northwest, so it's moving southeast. So that's what's happening here. And it backs up against this transitional forest. And when it reaches a 33-degree angle, it slips forward. And as it slips forward, it begins to bury the forest. And this is called the dune process. This is how dunes expand and grow. And all of the trees on the left we call them ghost trees, or it's a ghost forest, they're from the same piece of forest that you see on the right, but over the past however many years they've been buried. And I will say that in the past 25 years that I've been hiking here, this ghost forest has expanded somewhat. I have photos from every year of my 25 years that I've hiked in this area, and I've been able to see this forest expand. And the transitional forest, it's really exciting. This dune feature is called a retention ridge, and you're actually walking on the treetops. That's how high up you are when you're walking on that. And so I just kind of wanted you to understand what we mean when we say transitional forest. It's turning into dunes being buried by that moving sand. So this is my friend walking down into the transitional forest from the John Dellenbach Trail. She's walking down to Hall Lake. And so it just kind of gives you an idea of what that transitional forest looks like. This is another area of a transitional forest where this is a forest where the sand has I take it back. This is not a transitional forest. This is a forest that has grown over the sand. So the sand was stabilized and the forest has grown over this, but it has the similar habitat. And then tree islands. So this is out at the John Dellenbach Trail at the Umpqua Dunes. That's a great place to go if you want to see a lot of open sand that doesn't have too much grass on it yet. The grasses you see here are native, and the lower portion is probably the seashore bluegrass, because it looks like it's trailing there. And there might even be some fescue in the background there. And but a tree island is going to have a similar habitat. And this is my dog. I'm on a hike and I'm walking through a tree island. So I just kind of wanted you to get to see what these habitats look like. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the plants. So some of the plants that I think are interesting are the reindeer lichen over on the left, which grows. It doesn't grow everywhere. It grows in the Arctic and it grows here. That's my understanding. And it often grows in a plant community with kinnikinnick, which is the green plant behind it with the red berries. And often there'll be salal in there, or sometimes I'll see some of the manzanita in there growing with it as well. We have plant communities that form where certain plants tend to grow together, and that is one. It's this kinnikinnick reindeer lichen manzanita plant community. So it's kind of fun to see that. And next to it to the right is the rattlesnake plantain. I'm going to put these up because I've been giving presentations all day, so I'm getting a little tongue-tied. So the rattlesnake plantain is actually an orchid, and the flower, though, is not very spectacular in my personal opinion, but I think the leaves are spectacular. And these plants can really vary in the amount of white that they have, the amount of variegation, but they're just gorgeous when you see them. And of course, the rhododendrons that we have, the wild rhododendrons grow there. And then down at the bottom, something really interesting that I love to share with people. So in this plant community of kinnikinnick and manzanita, sometimes they will hybridize. And so on the very left, I have a picture of the kinnikinnick or bearberry, and in the middle, the hairy manzanita, and then on the right, the hybrid, the Arctostaphylos X media. And that is the name of the hybrid. And you can see that it's got lots of tiny little hairs on it. And these hybrids are super interesting because they can really vary. Like sometimes they look more like a manzanita, but then when you look at the leaf up close or you look at the flower or the berry, it's not the right size, it's not the right shape, it's not pointed at that tip, it's more round. Or sometimes the plant is growing low like a kinnikinnick, but the leaves are bigger and hairier. So they're kind of fun, and I'm always keeping an eye out for them when I'm walking on the dunes. And the manzanita, of course, have these gorgeous, gorgeous, deep red stalks or stems, and they're just really beautiful to see. And then some of the fun plants. I wanted to have a slide with some of the fun plants. Again, I wish I had time to go over everything that we have here, but I just can't. So here are some of the things that you might see this time of year when you're out on the dunes. And we have a lot of different fungi growing out there and some really interesting plants like the allotropa, the sugar stick, which is so beautiful, red and white. The western lily of the valley, there's so much of that on some of the tree islands and in some of the transitional forest that I often have people ask me if it's an invasive plant, but it's not. It's native, and it gets these really beautiful berries or pods this time of year. And I tried to highlight that in this photo with the sun to show you how pretty those are. And then, of course, the red juice tooth, the Hydenellum peckii, those are a mushroom that dyers use, and they are so beautiful to see with these red splotches all over. And you can really see a lot of those out here right now this time of year, the gnome plant. So again, all of these habitats have something interesting to offer and are worth coming to look at if you enjoy plants. And really your best time is going to be spring through summer probably to see most of these, although like the hydenellum, those things I'm seeing right now. This is the time to see those. If you're into fungi, this is the time to come. All right, so let's go back and look at these two pictures just as a reminder of how much open sand habitat we've lost due to that beach grass. And I want to talk about why this is happening. So we talked about you need three components to create the dunes. You need a lot of sand, a wind or some vehicle to move the sand. It's wind here, and you need that flat surface. So when European settlers arrived in the area, they staked out claims. They said, this is my claim, this is my land. And as you can see in this picture on the left, the moving sand does not respect that, obviously. It's nature, and it's going to continue moving inland across anything. And here is across a roadway behind Fred Meyer in Florence, Oregon. And so prior to European settlers coming, my understanding is that Native Americans would come to this area, but they lived with the land and moved with the land. They didn't have this idea of land ownership. They were part of nature and part of the land. And so they shifted and moved. And so as sand came into the area and moved, they moved and shifted with the changes in the area. And also, they often came to areas at different times, different seasons. So one season they might go somewhere to harvest a specific plant. Another time they might go to another area to hunt. Whereas when white settlers came, I might come and I might lay a claim and say, this is my land. And if all of a sudden it's being covered by sand, that's a problem. I can't pick up and move down the road because that's somebody else's land. And so some of the problems that they were experiencing, if you look at the two pictures on the right, the one at the top is Taconich Lake. And if you were to get a map out and look at all the lakes along the Oregon Dunes, almost all of them will have these interesting shapes, lots of arms, lots of fingers, or long and skinny. And it's true that some of these, like Taconich, now have dams, but even prior to the dams being put in by European white settlers, the shapes of the lakes still looked this way. And that is because there maybe was a river that was exiting the mountains here, and the moving sand shrunk it down to a creek or a stream and caused the sand to cause the water to back up and flood those mountain valleys. And so that has created these, we have great lakes in the dunes here for kayaking because all of our lakes are these incredible shapes that you can explore all these different arms. And then the bottom picture, you're looking at the picture of the Siuslaw River. And again, if you were to get a map out and look at a lot of our rivers here, you'll see that they all have these large bends in them. And so that's because the mouths of these rivers will shift with the changing seasons prior to jetties being put in. And so, for example, the mouth of the Siuslaw River in the winter, it might shift a mile northward, the mouth of that river, as sand is coming in from the south during winter storms. And then in the summer, as the sand is now blowing southward, coming from the north, the mouth of the river might shift up to a mile southward. And you can still see this type of change at, for example, Sutton Creek in Florence. The mouth of that creek moves up and down the beach all the time with the changing seasons. And that was a problem before the roads were put in, because that was the main way that people moved and transported goods in and out of the area. And boats would get caught on the sandbars and would either sink or not be able to come in and out of the area. And then in the 30s, they completed Highway 101, but yet again, it's a flat surface and sand was covering the area. Also, during this time, we had a lot of things happening. One was we had the Dust Bowl. So people were freaking out about any kind of blowing or moving sand. And we also had the CCC was installing lots of campgrounds and facilities here along the coast, and they wanted to stabilize that moving sand. So starting in the late 1800s, people began to plant European beach grass, and it was planted all up and down the coast. the major plantings started when Highway 101 was complete, and it was to protect the highway as well. And so this was planted, and they just planted it, as you see here, just in these rows. And then 2 years later, they would come in and plant Scotch broom again. This is planting here along Sutton Campground to create nitrogen-rich system so that other plants and trees and pines would grow. And so the result is what we see today. These dunes that are covered with beach grass, and you can also see broom in this picture and this expanding forest. And so it worked. They knew what they were doing, and it's unfortunate because now we're losing this important habitat. So the result is that the beach grass and the broom, which have no native predator, nothing that eats them, are outcompeting our native plants, and we're losing that habitat. So here are some pictures to just kind of show you before we wrap up the changes. At the top, you can see the Umpqua Dunes in 1930, I think that is. I can't see the top of my screen, it's covered. And then in the 2000s, you can see just some of the changes that are happening there. And again, if you want to see really good open sand habitat, the Umpqua Dunes are a great place to go. The John Dellenbach Trail is the one that will take you out there. And then down at the bottom, changes in the day use area as well, from 1941 to 1989 and then 2024. And so again, that grass has spread across created those four dunes blocking the incoming sand. And that red arrow is pointing to the tree island in each one of those photos. So you can kind of get an idea that you're looking at the same location. And so in 2014, a group of people got together. There were many of us that were working on our own. For example, I was going out and recruiting friends and pulling broom, and somebody else I know that I didn't realize was doing this was out mapping gorse to get gorse removed. And we were all running into each other. And at the same time, a group called Save the Riders Dunes, ATV riding group down in Coos Bay, were talking to the Forest Service saying, look, we're losing all the open sand. And then an environmental group, Oregon Wild, also started saying to the Forest Service, we're losing open sand, we have to do something. And so the Forest Service got those two groups together, and then from that expanded to quite a few other groups and government agencies, as well as just people like me who don't belong to any agency, who got together and said, look, we don't always agree on everything. Like Oregon Wild and Save the Riders Dunes sitting at the same table is not something you would see every day, but we all agreed that if we don't do something, what we have left will be lost. I mean, it would be great to restore some of it if we can. I mean, we'll never get rid of everything. It's impossible. And we all get in our cars and drive somewhere, so we probably wouldn't want to undo everything because of infrastructure. And also, people now are favoring the four dunes in some areas because they are also protecting people from the increased storm surges that we're having as the ocean temperatures are warming. So this group got together in 2014 and began working on a restoration plan. And this picture shows you, the group kind of consists of two working groups. There are people that you see here, which are just people like you and me that go out and remove invasive broom and gorse. And we've removed, I don't know, our restoration botanist is here today. He's pictured in the SaveTheOregonDunes.org photo, and he's would be your right if you're facing the screen in the orange vest. His name is Armand Rybishki, and he's here today, so he'll be able to answer some questions at the end about restoration. But so he might know how many acres that the volunteers have cleared, but I think it's several hundred, maybe even a couple thousand acres over the years, starting, way back in earlier than 2014, we've been out working. And then there is another arm that Armand works with through the Forest Service that does major restoration. So they're the ones that come out with the big equipment or big groups of people like Northwest Youth Corps and do the real big removals, especially of beach grass and broom that is too much for our workers to handle, our group. So our group is kind of split into these two working groups, and Save the Oregon Dunes helps raise grant money to do these larger projects through the Forest Service. So the collaborative had 3 goals. Took us about 4 years to put everything together and come up with a plan and where we would work and what we would do. And it was to preserve the best. What's good? Where do we have good habitat, good open sand habitat? Let's not let it get any worse, because we're losing about anywhere from 5 to 25 feet of open sand a year. It's extreme. And then where have we lost open sand, but it makes sense to restore that because maybe there is a plant that's threatened, like the pink sand verbena or the snowy plover. So where does it make sense to do site-specific restoration? And then where can we do large-scale restoration, which means knock down miles and miles and miles of foredunes, fill in those wetlands, and let that sand start moving in again. So that plan was put together, and we worked to get approvals to fill in the wetlands, and we had 3 projects ready to go, and then something happened. A cute little animal called the coastal martin was listed as threatened. And I don't even know if it might be endangered. I'm not sure if it's listed as endangered or threatened, so I apologize for not knowing that. And it was listed in, I think it was 2019 or 2020, and at the same time, COVID hit. So this put a halt on the large-scale restoration projects, and here's why. The coastal martin lives in shrubby habitat. Prior to the deflation plain developing, the coastal martin lived primarily on what would be now the east side of 101. The Siuslaw National Forest is huge. It goes from Tillamook to Coos Bay. And part of the reason it's so large is when the government was selling off timber, they did not want, nobody wanted this land because it had been burned and it was a lot of shrubland. It wasn't great wood, great for lumber. So it became a national forest. We were lucky in that respect, but it has been managed now into a beautiful forest that doesn't have a very thick and dense undergrowth in many places. And where do we have a thick and dense undergrowth now? Out on the Oregon Dunes in the deflation plain. And so the coastal martin and other martins have migrated out there, and it's believed that we don't know exactly where they are. We know there's some to the south. We know there's some to the north, but there wasn't funding to test the entire area. But when an animal becomes listed, any potential habitat becomes protected. So the deflation plain now is a protected habitat for the martin. So it put a halt on all of our large scale restoration. And this happened really literally right before COVID. So it was kind of a 1-2 punch for our group. So the group has gotten back together and they've been trying to evaluate what to do. So they're doing some large scale, a smaller project at the very north end of the Oregon Dunes, or actually outside of the recreation area, up north of Florence at Sutton. And it's a smaller one, but a smaller project just to kind of see how it works. Can we get sand moving? Part of the problem is if we were to do a large scale restoration in the middle of the dunes, and we had 2 other sites that we were going to do that at, it will create a gap in that deflation plain, and the martins will not cross. I don't know, it's something like 50 feet of open sand. They won't cross that because it puts them at risk from predators. And so it would divide this already very small population, which I think is like 100 or so, into possibly 3 smaller groups. And so that's why that was stopped. It was like, nope, you can't do that right now. So our group, we have a large group meeting coming up. If you're interested, make sure that you sign up. You can come to the meeting or get information about it coming up in November. We've kind of regrouped and we are now talking about what will our next 2 years look like. So maybe will choose to do more focusing on preserving the best and restoring site-specific processes. I don't know. That's going to be what the larger group will be determining. So how you can help, if you're interested, tell people this story, tell people what's going on, come out and visit the dunes so you get a feel of what we have and what we're losing. Join the Oregon Dunes Restoration Collaborative. We literally send out about 4 newsletters a year, so we won't inundate you. And we send out, if you sign up saying you want to do volunteer work, you'll get notified whenever we have a group cleanup going on. We usually do about, I don't know, 6 or 7 of those over the summer, and then there's a few over the winter sometimes. There's other volunteer work that you can do to help. You can also donate at our website at saveoregondunes.org. I can't sell books via Zoom, so we do book sales as well when I give presentations. So the good news, we're almost done. I'm wrapping up and then we'll take questions, is that there is still a lot of open sand out there to enjoy. So I hope that you will be interested in learning more and signing up at least for our newsletter at the website, saveoregondunes.org. If you're interested in learning more about history and geology and the topography of the dunes and what's happening day to day, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Secrets of the Oregon Dunes. I think Chelsea's going to put all of this in the chat box so you can copy and paste it. You don't have to worry about trying to write it down. And I'm also on iNaturalist as PNW Coast Hiker. I do try to put information on my Facebook and Instagram regularly, although over the summer, not as much, because I don't hike out on the dunes that much in the summer because it's really windy. So I'm just getting back into hiking now. So now's a good time to follow if you want to see more plant pictures and more dune pictures and learn about them. And then finally, the last slide, Chelsea will also be putting this in the chat box so you can copy it. I can't share every book and every website I visit. I mean, it would be impossible. It'd be another 5 to 10 slides. But here are some that you may or may not know about. Most people know about Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast and Ethnobotany of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, 2 of my very favorite books. Patty Whereat Phillips is a treasure. She knows so much about the history of our plants and the tribes and how plants were used. And she's also a linguist. She's an incredible person. If you want to hear some information from Patty, well, maybe you guys can get her as a speaker, which would be awesome. I have her contact info if you don't have it. But I did 2 interviews with her on my radio show, and you can link to those at beyondyourfrontdoornorthwest.com. And one about her background as a linguist, and then one about ethnobotany. So anyway, those are 2 great books. And then 2 other books that I really enjoy are by George Pointer Jr. And the first one, That Naturalist Guide to the Hidden World of Pacific Northwest Dunes. And the other one is A Naturalist Guides to the Plant Habitats or Plant Communities. I think, I can't see it. I've got something blocking the screen, but I think it's Plant Habitats of Pacific Northwest Dunes. So this is the last slide. So I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to close it down so Chelsea can get back on the screen and we can take any questions that you might have. And again, this should be in the chat box, all of this information. Okay, and I don't see a mouse here, so, oh, there we go. Okay, awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody, too, for sticking with it.
Thank you, Dina, for that great presentation. Yeah, this was really good. And I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but feel free to put them in the chat, or let me know your name and I can unmute you to ask your question as well.
Yeah, and Armin's here, I believe, so we can unmute him. So if you have a question about restoration, how they do it, what's been done, then, oh, and there's a nice message from Patty. She's here. All right. So actually Patty's here too. So we have the ethnobotanist here, and she knows a lot about the plants out there. So if you want to know anything about maybe like historical medicinal use of the plants or food uses, she's your person. This is a great chance to ask those questions. And if there's no questions, that's okay too. And again, if you think of something later, you can contact me through my Facebook page or my website.
Oh, I think Elaine has a question. Elaine, do you want to ask that?
You bet. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, super. Um, I grew up on the coast and lived there for probably another 20 years from the early 80s into the 90s. And, we knew European beach grass was bad stuff. We knew it did not belong there. What I'm kind of flummoxed about is, I spent 20 years doing habitat restoration in the Portland area. So I worked in different ecosystems and I know how to make some big changes pretty quickly. I'm just a little surprised at the lack of investment in the dunes and the natural processes that should be happening there. And I don't know if this is going to put Armand on the spot, but is it competing priorities with budgets for fighting fires or what's happening here? I understand the Martin issue, but that's just a few years old. So I just really appreciate if you're comfortable describing some of the reasons why it has been such a slow pace.
Great. And I just unmuted. Oh, I thought I unmuted Armand, but okay. And so I don't know, Armand, is that something you can talk about?
Yeah, I can, at least in general terms. So, well, I came to the Siuslaw from Southwest Oregon, Medford BLM in 2017. I kind of inherited the dunes issue, so to speak, and we had to create an environmental analysis that was going to look at foredunes and inland dunes, what was left to address the actions that we could take to preserve what's open dunes and work on those plover areas on the foredunes. So we got through that, and yes, the Martin came in kind of in the middle or late in the process and pretty much shut down any deflation plane activity where there was already thick vegetation. So now, and the project was initially about 14,000 acres. Through some GIS mapping and stuff, it that mapped additional Martin habitat or connectivity corridors and such, etc. That got trimmed down to about 12,000 acres. And well, we're working as hard as we can with about a $250,000 to 300,000 grand put towards contracts to do dunes restorations. And it's not getting much acreage towards that 12,000 acres. So we worked on the protect the best areas. We got some good treatments there. And since we did treatments in the protect the best areas, and pardon, I'm a little nervous talking here because I got to be careful about what I say with the Forest Service. But so I've tried to balance riding areas, treatments on the boundaries and the edge to stop the march in of the beach grass and the broom, and also in our non-motorized areas. And well, the succession of this vegetation has been really tough. We recently last year put some really hard work into the overlook area But the Portuguese broom was so big and the habitat succession happened so fast. Well, we trimmed out the broom and everything, and here comes other weeds. It's an extremely challenging and difficult situation, and given limited funding and capacity, I think we're doing the best we can. That doom and gloom being said, out on the foredunes, I work with our wildlife people who are bulldozing and shaping some of those foredune areas for plover habitat. And we've had some real good success reintroducing pink sand verbena. And as another, as a side benefit, we're seeing lots of nice dunes native plants coming in. Yellow sand verbena is starting to flourish out there, and beach evening primrose, et cetera, and so forth. So I hear I hear your concern, and we're doing what we can, and I guess that's about all I can say right now in this, unless you have a follow-up.
It looks like she might. I'll unmute Elaine if you want to ask. I think you
Okay, thanks. No, Armand, I really appreciate that. And I realize that it's an awkward position for you to speak from here, and I really appreciate your candor. Yeah, fortunately, $250,000 to $300,000 a year is a very generous budget. So I'm really grateful that you have that now. And I've done a lot of work with exotic grass control and with Scots broom control. I'm going to put a couple of things in the comments that may or may not be useful to you. But I applaud all your efforts, and I really do hope that some of these plants can start getting a little bit more of the weight that we give to the wildlife, especially vertebrates. Thanks again.
It looks like we have a question from Willow in the chat, and this is for Patty. She's asking, do you know of any native ground cover or grass that can outgrow the non-native beach grass? She says, I also hear, oh, Patty's answered in the chat.
Oh, she already answered. Okay.
Okay, check out the chat for that one, I guess.
So I just want to, I thought if it's okay, I'd like to talk about, Elaine, your question also just historically. Unfortunately, I don't have the historic picture of why people waited so long. I feel like also like this is an area where, people who hike and go in the non-riding areas like us, there's not as many voices, right? Like there's a lot of voices from the people who ride, right? And so I think like I don't know if this is true, and Armin can correct me. I think he's still unmuted, or I'll unmute him. He can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think like we've probably seen worse growth in the non-riding areas, right? And so, but that's where there was less population having comment. And they're still planting beach grass today. The Forest Service isn't. They stopped a long, long time ago. But I mean, private landowners can still plant it today to stabilize their land. So it's a tough battle, and it's a tough battle to say we should remove it. One of the questions we always get right away is, well, are you going to take it? Are you going to remove it where there's infrastructure, right? Because that moving sand is a problem for people. So anyway, unfortunately don't have the historical knowledge of why, people didn't start doing this. They started, making plover habitat a long time ago, but that's not enough to get a sand movement happening.
Can I ask a question about, when you say riders, you're speaking of dune buggy riders or the other mechanically vehicles with machine?
Yeah, ATVs, so Save the Riders Dunes is a group in an organized group of ATV riders or off-road vehicle riders
Mhm.
based in Coos Bay.
And
So
it's,
when I
they
say
have
that,
lob-
that's what I'm talking about.
and they have lobbyists that go to the state legislature that have
They-
money.
I'm sure they do. If not, I'm sure the companies that provide the things they ride on do.
Yeah, that's right. So there's your answer, Elaine. And that's intense. But we see that in other fragile areas, even inside an urban area. We have a very special location where motorized remote control trucks are allowed to climb all over rocks where there's some pretty unusual plants in vernal pools, for instance, on an island. But we just still have to keep doing some education.
Thank you. Yes.
Good job. Thanks so much for enlightening us, but also making us lose sleep.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to encourage people, if you have a chance to get out this way, come out. If you're coming out here, I know a lot of you are based in Portland, so it's kind of a trip down here. But if you're coming, let me know if I'm available and you want to go out together. I'm happy to take you out to some really pristine areas and show you what we got.
We just might plan a special field trip with you.
That'd be great. Maybe next spring, or we can do a field trip. That would be great. We do that through Save the Oregon Dunes all the time.
Thank you so much. It's awesome to meet you, Dina.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Wonderful show. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
So now I think we wanna open it up to like a little bit more of a social, so people can talk and chat and meet each other. And specifically if you're new to the Native Plant Society of Oregon, or our chapter, if you wanna unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the group, we would welcome that now. So feel free to do that.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm cloudy. I have made 2 trips this summer down to the Dunes area and kayaked a whole lot in that area. And I found that some of the plants I thought I knew were very different in some of those lakes. And that's been very interesting for me. But one of the things that I thought I would mention is kind of not about the plants of the dunes exactly, but recently found out that the Oregon Rock Association, I think that's what it's called, is going to be starting a sand project. Julian Gray, and he's head of that organization. And since I'm a kayaker, I thought I'd volunteer. But yeah, I've already been looking at sand from various places with my granddaughter under the microscope, and we've decided that the Florence sand is the most amazing.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Can I comment about this?
Totally.
I talk about the sand. My regular presentation is not about plants. It's about the geology, history, and of the dunes. We have awesome sand. That sand is so clean and so soft and so beautiful, and the colors and the different minerals. So thank you for saying something about that. It's one of my favorite things. If you come out here, bring a magnifying glass. It's worth it.
Yeah, and under the microscope, it looks like little agates.
Yeah, it's amazing because it is really, in a way, that's what it is, right? Little agates that are just broken, down smaller and smaller. I love that. I love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
So those agates are from the sea, the deep sea floor, is that correct, Dina?
So the sand that on the dunes that we have here is mostly from the Cascade Mountains.
Oh,
minor contributions from the coastal mountain range, but the majority of the minerals in our sand match the minerals that are in the
okay.
Cascade Mountains. And scientists took core samples from the mouths of the different rivers along the dunes, and the sand at the mouth of the Umpqua, which comes from the Cascade, is the sand that most closely match the minerals that are in the Oregon dunes.
Wow, that's a long trip.
Yeah. So, and just if you think
Numbers of
of like a rock tumbler, right? You just, if you never turn off a rock tumbler, that just, it just breaks it down into sand. And that's literally what you're walking on here. And it's so soft and so beautiful.
Is that true of sand on beaches everywhere in the world? Is coming from rivers?
I don't know the answer to that. And I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure because I think in some cases they can come from glaciers, but I'm not a geologist. I only know about the geology of the dunes here. So unless somebody else here knows.
Well, Frank, what do
Well,
you know?
we'll have to consult Julian Gray.
Yeah.
Got his card
So
here.
that the most of the sand on tropical beaches comes from the poop of coral eating fishes, the parrotfishes that eat the corals and then spit out or pass ground up coral sand particles, and that washes up on the shore. So
Wow.
our beaches in Hawaii and elsewhere in the Pacific are coralline beaches, coralline sand.
Sure. Okay, yeah, that's true, and also Cuba and some other islands
Yeah.
in the Caribbean. Okay,
And
What?
I would add too, an amazing thing to do if any of you are kayakers is to kayak down the Silkus River to the beach. You can't go on to the beach once it's at the ocean in that area because of the plover nesting there. But what's amazing is you paddle through sand dunes. It's just really amazing to do
Is it-
that. Also, there's a little dam to port over, which is really fun.
Mhm.
So Patty has a story, and I think she's still on here. I don't know if I'm going to try to tell it, but Patty, maybe you want to tell it. I don't know about how tribal members used to travel through the dunes here and along the coast from lake to lake. And they would literally just get out of one lake, portage their canoe to the next lake and get in across the sand. And I love that story because if you look at a map, we just have like a chain of these dunal lakes. It's so incredible to kayak out here. I'm a kayaker also. Oh, she said she can't unmute. I'm going to unmute her. Okay, I unmuted you, Patty.
Oh, goody. Yeah, I don't usually use Zoom on my phone, so I don't know what I'm doing. But yes, I came across a fun story, especially between Coos Bay and Skyetch, 10 Mile. They would use the chain of lakes to help sort of like be a highway for canoes. So paddle through the lakes and then, just portage the canoe between lakes and just keep going. And the reason people wanted to go to Skyetch to the 10 Mile Lake so much is because it used to be in the past a great place to gather wapato. Unfortunately, to date, the 10 Mile Lake's been through a lot of ecological bad things, and probably low on the list of bad things is there's not much wapato left in those lakes, but in the past there was a lot, and it was one of the things that drew people there to gather that, as well as it used to be very good salmon fishing watershed.
Salmon would be in those landlocked lakes?
Well, the 10 Mile Lakes aren't landlocked. It's connected to the ocean by 10 Mile Creek.
And where is that between what towns?
It's kind of roughly midway between Coos Bay and the Umpqua River. So if you're familiar with the little town of Lakeside,
Not at
that's
all.
where the 10 Mile Lakes and 10 Mile Creek is. But yeah, it's basically kind of smack dab between Coos Bay and the Umpqua River.
Sounds like fabulous
Basically,
land.
any body of water connected somehow to a creek that ultimately goes to the sea had salmon or trout. And it's amazing what twisty routes the creeks take. They're pretty interconnected in some places.
Well, doesn't the Chetco make its way down, or does that go into the Rogue? That's further.
The Chetco goes right to the sea. It's really close to the Oregon-California border.
Right.
So it's south of the Rogue River.
Yes, of course. But I thought that was one of those really wild rivers that the salmon is not really obstructed. Is that correct? There's no dam on it?
Yeah, as far as I know, there's no dams on the
Wonderful.
Chetco. And the Rogue, I think, only has a couple of dams really high up.
Mhm.
So it's got a, I guess for modern times, a decent salmon run.
The thing about the coast for me is there's a river about every 5 miles.
Yeah, we got a
Coming
lot of
into
water.
the ocean, the Pacific, and so it's really hard to remember what county was that. I got to go back to that gorgeous spot, but where was that? You'd be like
Yeah.
pulling off the road, but there's nowhere to stop on the I-101. And I haven't done it for so many years. It's just really a special place. I'm so glad that it's remote in some ways.
I recently heard a story that the reason the towns along the coast are situated as they are, each one's about roughly, at least in our area here, are all about, 25 miles apart or so, is because that they used to, before Highway 101 was here, they would bring the horses and the wagons on the beach at low tide.
Wow.
And that was the distance they could travel. And
Wow.
so so kind of each town is set up so that they could travel with the wagons and the horses. I thought that was interesting. That was
Oh,
something I
my
just heard
goodness.
recently.
And also be watching very carefully as it rose.
Yeah.
Wow, I got you. That's why. So that'd be like a 2-hour ride or something.
Yeah. So
Okay, wow. Well, there was only one way to get anywhere, and that was on a boat, too.
yeah.
That's
And
true
of
of
course, they used to do the dunes
California.
the mushing from Coos Bay to Florence with the male
What?
mushers. They had mushing dogs and they would go
No,
across the dunes
no
and they
way.
would stop the first day, I think, in Lakeside. And then the second night they would come up to, or the second day they would end in Florence. And they stopped doing it because they can't get through anymore without going onto the beach because there's too much growth now. So
Oh,
I know it was a bummer.
Who did that? Was that tribal people, or was that just crazy people?
That was probably crazy people. I think it was called the Oregon Dunes Mail Run, and you can still find information about it online. Some guy's trying to write a book about it right now, I believe. I don't know if he's finished or not, but you can find a lot online about it.
There was a mail delivery via a dune mush dog pulling device.
That was the idea. And I don't know if it was, you'd have to go look at the history. I don't know if it was true mail delivery, but I think it was just something that they were doing with the mushing dogs off season or something. There's a whole story, there's a whole website about it.
Sounds fun. Well, you're just full of all kinds of folklore. And thanks for the ethnobotany advice too, Patty. Everybody, you just have so many interesting people on the beach down there.
Yeah, and I say thank you to Armand and Patty as well, because they've taught me a lot of the things that I talk about in my presentations, both of them. So thank you both for that.
All right. I'm gonna sign off, but everybody did have any other questions?
Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody who stayed to chat, and have a great day.